I slammed the pantry door closed so hard the cupboards rattled, and the clink of glass jars echoed like an alarm. My phone buzzed again, urgent, insistent, vibrating against the Formica countertop. I grabbed it, my fingers slick with morning coffee, and dragged the screen open. A message from an unknown number glowed back at me, a single line of text, "You deserve to know." Before I could process it, a folded photograph lay beneath those words. I unfolded it with trembling hands and froze. There she was, my wife, against the marble bar of the campus cafe, her head tilted back in laughter as Dr. Whitaker's arm curled around her waist. Their smiles were easy, intimate. The hum of passing cars outside our 8th-floor window swelled until it was all I heard. I pressed the photo to my chest and closed my eyes against the metallic bite of cold espresso on my tongue. The coffee, cold and bitter, sloshed as I exhaled. Flicking my gaze to the vintage clock on the opposite wall, I saw the second-hand tick past 30, a silent reminder that time hadn't paused for me. I anchored my breath, counting down from 10 to 1, willing my pulse to steady. When I opened my eyes, I set the photograph on the table and inhaled slowly, tasting that sharp metallic aftertaste again. Stay present, I coached myself. My heart hammered, but I forced each beat into a calm rhythm. Logic was my ally, panic would come later, if at all. I rose and moved to the window, where sunlight sliced through the blinds in slanted stripes. My fingertips brushed the cold glass, and I imagined her in that lecture hall 2 floors below, her notebook open, her pen poised, her laughter blending with his praise, "You're the most promising student I've ever had." A flicker of anger stoked the calm I fought to preserve. Back at the table, I unlocked my laptop and clicked through to the attorney's site I'd bookmarked months ago. That precautionary step, taken on a whim, now felt prescient. I opened a fresh email draft. "I need to meet. Urgent." My finger hovered above send as the distant roar of a bus rattled the window frame. My rational mind catalogued every detail, timestamp on the photo, 8:42 a.m., meaning their rendezvous happened while she told me she was in class. The sleek curve of Dr. Whitaker's blazer sleeve. The faint scent of jasmine on her hair, lingering in pixel form. Each fragment piled into evidence. The phone buzzed again, but I ignored it. I stood, filled a glass with ice and tap water, cold comfort, but a detail to note, and returned to the photograph. The low hum of traffic became a steady backdrop, underscoring the surreal clarity dawning in me. Shock was giving way to purpose. I silenced the phone, slid it into my back pocket, and tapped the wedding photo on my mantel, a frozen smile from our reception day. That moment, too, was captured in a photograph. I traced its frame with my thumb, then squared my shoulders. The pendulum of the clock ticked methodically. In that measured swing, I found resolve. I flicked off the kitchen light, the room going dark except for the thin strip of daylight under the door. With each step toward the hallway, grief loosened its grip, replaced by the steady click of determination. Today, the betrayal seated in a single photograph would set in motion a careful, unshakable plan. Departure, not despair, guided my way. I still remember the warmth of that first night, late summer, cicadas droning outside as we shared a pepperoni pizza on our cramped balcony. She laughed at my half-hearted attempts to play guitar, her voice so soft it mingled with the haze of garlic and tomato. I traced her fingertip along the wrought iron railing. At the time, it felt like the world's most natural choreography. Months later, we bought our first house together. I sanded the floorboards in the living room until they gleamed, while she painted the walls a muted dove gray. I can still smell the mingled scents of fresh pine and latex paint. We installed that ornate clock above the mantel, its brass pendulum swinging timelessly, on a Saturday afternoon. She teased me about my obsession with precision, but when the clock chimed its first hour in our new home, her eyes softened. In those early years, we settled into routines that felt unbreakable. Saturday morning pancakes on the Formica table, her humming a comforting accompaniment to the sizzle of batter. Weeknight ritual, she curling up beside me on the couch with a mug of lavender tea while I read aloud from whatever book we were devouring. I'd pause to meet her gaze over the rim of my coffee cup, her eyes reflecting lamplight and something I took for unreserved adoration. But small fractures began to appear. It started with the late-night phone calls. I'd wake to the chime of her FaceTime at 12:37 a.m., the glow of her screen showing only the carpeted floor and one trembling shoulder. When I asked, she'd murmur that a classmate was struggling with their thesis. I accepted it. After all, she was immersed in her degree, and I trusted her implicitly. Then, there was the weekend she studied at the library. I drove by the campus's brick facade at dusk and saw her silhouette leaning against the archway with a man whose back was turned. I almost called her name, but something in her posture, shoulders drawn in, head tilted toward him, made me hesitate. I chalked it up to mistaken identity. Still, that uneasy flutter never fully left me. The suspicions deepened the night I found the bank alert at 2:14 a.m., a ride-share charge to a downtown cafe. The cafe we'd once frequented as a couple, now the scene of a clandestine drop-off. I stared at my phone in the half-lit kitchen, the chill of marble countertop seeping into my palm. When she rolled in at dawn, I asked about her late return. She blamed group study. I nodded and helped her remove her coat, noticing the faint scent of someone else's aftershave clinging to the collar. Over the next week, I began keeping a ledger under my desk, dates, times, small anomalies. A text she deleted before I could read it. A lipstick stain on her lecture notes. Whispered laughter drifting through the apartment's thin walls after I'd turned in. Each entry felt like lowering another brick in a wall between us, a wall I was building in secret. One Sunday afternoon, I sat with our bank statements spread around me like evidence at a homicide scene. Every withdrawal from the student cafe, every ride-share fare that didn't coincide with campus maps, every bookstore purchase, some textbooks, others unaccounted for. I cross-referenced timestamps with her class schedule, drawing lines in red ink. My hand shook, but my mind was sharp. This wasn't mere cheating, it was a calculated pattern, and I was the only one tracing it. I recalled her smile that morning, innocuous as she poured more coffee into my mug. The hum of the espresso machine, the way steam curled into the harsh fluorescent light. I returned her smile and didn't let on that I'd found more than grounds and beans that day. Then came the group chat messages, laughter emojis, half-hearted complaints about late-night cram sessions, plans for coffee runs at odd hours. I screenshot them all. The digital chatter, their guarded intimacy, it felt like watching someone else's life play out behind a glass partition. Yet even as I collected clues, I felt the ache of every memory, their joy and their betrayal inseparable in my mind. I flipped through our wedding album one evening, tracing her Kensington lace gown with my thumb, recalling how her father squeezed my hand and how she whispered, "Forever." I closed the album and tucked it away. By the time that photograph arrived on my phone, her laughing with Dr. Whitaker, I had pages of notes, timestamps, screenshots, and a ledger full of uneasy certainties. The memories that once built our world together now served as the foundation for my resolve. I would not be undone by denial. Each recollection, each small suspicion once dismissed, now fueled the systematic pursuit of truth. And what I'd learned in those months of flashbacks was this: love can blind you, but meticulous attention can restore your vision. I walked into Dalton and Price Family Law at exactly 9:02 a.m., greeted by the muted click of my shoes on polished marble. The receptionist, Mrs. Kerrigan, whose name I'd noted on the firm's website, handed me a folder stamped "Confidential" before disappearing through a frosted glass door. I sank into the leather chair and extracted my notebook, the one with the brass latch that matched our mantel clock's finish. Inside, I'd already logged 20 entries of dates, times, and red ink annotations. Moments later, I was ushered into Attorney Price's office. Charles Price was a tall man in his 50s, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He offered a firm handshake. "Mr. Allen, I've reviewed the materials you sent over. Quite a pattern here." I placed my folder on his desk, screenshots of messages, bank statements with highlighted rideshare charges, security camera quotes. He opened my ledger, flipping to the page marked with that photograph's timestamp, 8:42 a.m. "First step," he said, voice low and measured, "we need to preserve every piece of evidence. I'll send you an engagement letter today. Once signed, everything you give me is attorney-client privileged." He slid a stack of papers toward me: engagement agreement, fee schedule, and a checklist. Evidence preservation: secure original devices, avoid deleting or modifying digital files. Custody proposal: draft your preferences for legal and physical custody, including visitation schedules. Asset discovery: compile accounts, property deeds, retirement plans. Temporary orders: determine interim support or restraining orders if necessary. I nodded, heart steady. Understood. That afternoon, I met my brother, Alex, at our parents' house, where I grew up and spent 1,000 childhood hours practicing calm under pressure during weekend chess matches. Over lukewarm tea in chipped porcelain cups, I outlined the plan. I'd engage Charles Price, install security cameras, and begin drafting custody proposals. Alex, an engineer by trade, offered his unbiased perspective and some technical advice on camera placement. Focus on entrances, hallways, anywhere she'd enter or leave unseen, he said, sketching a floor plan on a napkin. We circled the front door, the hallway to the nursery, and the back entrance near the garage. He recommended a model with 1080p resolution and date-stamped recording. Discreet, wired into your home network, he added. I took notes: brand, Arlo Pro 3, color, white mount so it blends with the ceiling, angle, downward at 45 degrees. That weekend, I met Jenna, my colleague turned confidant. Over sandwiches at the deli where we'd once brainstormed marketing campaigns, I confided in her the legal necessities, notarizing documents, drafting asset division spreadsheets, and the emotional toll. Jenna listened, stirring her iced tea, then offered to witness my notarization at her law firm. 2 birds, 1 stone, she joked, scanning the documents I'd prepared: custody proposals, a list of shared assets, and the family ledger. With her stamp and signature, those pages carried more weight than any casual note. Each signature felt like another link forged in my chain of resolve. Back home on Sunday morning, I installed the cameras exactly where Alex had marked. I stood on a stepladder, Phillips head screwdriver in hand, aligning the mount to the drywall anchor. The first camera clicked into place. I connected the Ethernet cable through the attic hatch, testing its feed on my laptop. A crisp black and white hallway view appeared, date and time overlay blinking, June 15, 2025, 10:17. It was future dated, a reminder that this process would unfold over weeks. As the final camera powered on, I pictured my wife moving through the frame, innocent or otherwise, and stored that mental image alongside every other data point. That night, I added the camera credentials to my encrypted notes. Over the next 2 days, I drafted the custody proposal in meticulous detail: joint legal custody, primary physical custody with me, alternate weekends with her, holiday rotation spelled out by calendar date, and provisions for summer break. I referenced Massachusetts Family Code sections I'd reviewed online, ensuring the language mirrored the statute. The court shall consider the best interests of the child, including the emotional ties between the child and both parents, MGLC 208, Section 31b. I underlined emotional ties and noted a plan to include character references from her professor and my sister. For the asset spreadsheet, I listed marital home, address, current market value, joint checking and savings accounts, bank name, account numbers, balances, retirement plans, 401k statements, personal property, vehicles, furniture, art collection. Next to each, I wrote, proposed division, 50-50, or, to remain solely with husband, if it had sentimental value, like the mantel clock, which I intended to keep. Midweek, I received an email from Attorney Price with his redlined edits to the custody draft. He suggested adding language about reasonable travel distances, 4 school pickups and a clause permitting video check-ins if she traveled more than 50 miles. He also recommended a temporary order for my wife to provide her academic schedule and refrain from overnight guests in our home. I accepted his suggestions, then forwarded the revised documents to Jenna for witnessing. In between, I had a phone call with Dr. Whitaker's department head, under the guise of discussing her academic progress. He confirmed her enrollment and excused absences for independent study, unwittingly providing me official documentation. I saved his emailed response as a PDF. By the end of the week, I had an attorney-client agreement signed and filed. 5 days of security camera footage backing up key entry points. A notarized custody proposal and asset spreadsheet. Supporting documentation from the university. Character references lined up from my brother, Jenna, and a neighbor who'd watched our daughters. Each piece slotted into place like a hinge on a door I was steadily opening. I felt a growing sense of mastery. This betrayal would be met not with despair but with precision. Late Friday night, I paused in my living room, lit only by the glow of a single floor lamp. I picked up the family ledger and read the final entry aloud to myself. June 18, 2025, evidence package complete. Next, draft petition and file for temporary orders. I closed the ledger and reached for the mantel clock's photograph. The glass surface reflected my tired eyes, but also a quiet pride. I set it beside the notebook containing our settlement objectives. I rubbed my hands together and exhaled, listening to the pendulum's steady tick. In that rhythmic swing, I heard justice in motion, and I knew the next step would bring me one measure closer to reclaiming the life that betrayal tried to steal. I stepped into the lawyer's office and closed the door behind me with deliberate calm. The late afternoon sun slanted through the frosted glass panels, casting diamond patterns on the polished oak floor. Attorney Price rose and motioned me toward the conference table. On its surface lay a single-framed wedding photograph, our smiles lit by candlelight, her hand resting on my arm. He slid it closer. "Mr. Allen," he began, voice neutral, "shall we proceed?" I placed my folder on the table, then set the photograph beside it. My fingers brushed the gilded frame as I spoke, "Yes." I unfolded the first sheet, a printout of time-stamped security camera stills showing her leaving the campus cafe at exactly 8:42 a.m. I let the images speak first, her black heels on the terrazzo floor, the lecturer's hand at her lower back. Silence filled the room except for the soft ticking of the mantel clock behind me. She appeared then, flanked by her attorney, eyes wide at the sight of the photographs. She tried to speak, lips parted, but no sound came. I maintained eye contact, voice measured. "This is the day you chose to meet Dr. Whitaker instead of attending lecture, while I believed you were working toward our future." Her shoulders curved, shame and surprise warring on her face. She glanced at the photograph of our wedding. No, I interrupted quietly. "Let me continue." I rifled through the folder, bank statements showing rideshare charges at midnight, screenshots of deleted texts recovered from my backup, email confirmation of tuition payments labeled independent study. Each document slid across the table, arranged in neat columns. Attorney Price nodded and summarized, "We have sufficient prima facie evidence to support temporary orders for custody and asset preservation." She swallowed and lifted her gaze. "Michael, I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. I met her apology with calm resolve. "You did hurt me. But my goal today is resolution, not recrimination." I held up the wedding photo. "I'm offering you two options. We can negotiate a fair settlement now, or let the court's process drag both of us, and our daughters, through public hearings." Her lip trembled. The lecturer's name hung in the air, unspoken. She glanced at his empty chair in the corner of the room. Attorney Price interjected, "If we proceed cooperatively, we can draft a parenting plan that safeguards everyone's interests. Otherwise, we file for motions and hearings." She nodded slowly, voice small, "I understand." I closed my folder and slid it across the table. "Then let's begin." She picked up a sheet, our proposed custody schedule, and exhaled. The clock's pendulum swung methodically behind her, a silent witness to her concession. In that moment, I saw not just her regret but the final break between our past and what lay ahead. As we signed the temporary agreement, I noticed her eyes flick toward the wedding photo one last time. The symbol of our vows had served its purpose, to mark the moment she realized our bond was irrevocably altered. We shook hands, the three of us, wife, husband, mediator, in the golden light of late afternoon. No dramatic outburst, no tears from me, only the quiet click of a pen returning to its tray. When I left, the corridor outside felt impossibly bright. The photograph and evidence remained behind glass in that office, but inside me, I carried forward a new image, not of betrayal, but of measured victory. The clock on the wall chimed 5 times, each toll affirming that justice had been served with dignity and resolve. By late morning on June 22, the temporary orders were signed, sealed, and filed. I stood in the clerk's office, watching the deputy's stamp imprint filed across the top of our agreement: joint legal custody, primary physical custody with me, and a clear schedule for her visitation. Property and accounts were divided per our spreadsheet. She received the equity from her student loans, I kept the house and the mantel clock. Driving home, I felt the familiar weight in my chest, the one that used to constrict with panic and grief, but now it settled into a steady, purposeful thrum. I parked in the driveway and noticed the brass pendulum of my clock catching the sunlight through the front window. Its rhythmic swing was once a reminder of lost time, now it marked each deliberate second of my restored life. That afternoon, I cleared the garage workbench, my old woodworking station, and retrieved the American walnut planks I'd laid aside for a new project. I sanded the wood until it gleamed, the smooth shavings collecting at my feet like promises of renewal. As I worked the plane across the grain, I let my thoughts wander to my daughter's laughter echoing in our newly quiet home. In the evenings, I began drafting the first post for my personal blog, Time Reclaimed. I wrote in clear, measured paragraphs. When betrayal shatters your world, the impulse is to crumble. But there is power in precision, dignity in deliberate action, and hope in every tick of the clock. I mapped out future posts, practical guides for evidence gathering, template custody schedules, and interviews with legal experts. The blog wasn't just a chronicle of my journey, it was a lifeline I offered to others navigating the same storm. On June 25th, I met with my brother and Jenna over coffee at that same campus cafe where suspicion once took root. I surprised them by presenting each with a small wooden keepsake I'd carved, a miniature pendulum clock, its hands frozen at 8:42. They understood the significance. As we clinked mugs, I felt a quiet joy, friendship and family, the twin foundations of my new beginning. That evening, I installed the mantel clock in my study and set its hands to the current time. I paused to watch the brass pendulum swing, left, right, each arc a testament to chapters closed and unwritten chapters ahead. I placed the framed wedding photo back on the shelf, not as a relic of sorrow but as a reminder of promises I'll keep myself, honesty, resilience, and purpose. Before bedtime, I tucked my daughters into their bunk beds and kissed their foreheads. They asked if Mommy would read to them on her weekend visits. I smiled, smoothing the blanket over them both. She will, I said. And I'll be here for every bedtime story. As I stepped into the hallway, the soft tick of the clock followed me, steady, reliable. In its beat I heard more than minutes passing. I heard the echo of a life reclaimed, measured not by loss, but by the patient resolve that transformed betrayal into the foundation of my renewed hope.